Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome back to my Logic Pro 11 sidechaining techniques course. In this video, I'm going to show you probably the most basic and typical way of using sidechaining, and that is to create a ducking effect with a compressor. This was a stylistic feature of early house music in the late 80s and early 90s is really where this originates from. Of course, back then it was DJs using hardware to do this rather than using software or DAWs, but we can recreate this ducking effect in Logic very easily. So in the demo project, I have 3 drum tracks. The first 2 are just kick drums. One is audio, another one is MIDI and a software instrument, and then the third one is a full drum machine designer kit. And then I have 2 basses, one that's basic and one that is arpeggiated. So to just set up the basic effect here, you want to have the basic bass and the kick audio tracks unmuted. You can mute the rest of them. And the way this works is the kick drum here is going to serve as our sidechain compression source, meaning that every single time the kick hits, it's going to duck the level of the bass. So right now you can hear that the bass is just, at max volume, and the kick is going to kind of struggle to be heard over the bass. So very simple. You can hear there's no motion to it whatsoever, and that's one of the things that you get from this ducking effect is you get some motion and dynamics out of the bass. Okay, so what we're going to do is on the bass track, we're going to add the compressor plugin under Dynamics here. Logic's compressor is fairly good at creating sidechain ducking effects. And to get started, what you need to do is you need to select your sidechain source from the sidechain menu up here. So what I'm going to do is click on this menu. At first, we're going to do this with audio. So let's go to audio, and here's that kick audio. So we've selected that kick as our sidechain source. Now let's see what kind of compression we're getting. So you can see that gain reduction meter is going down every single time the kick hits. Whereas if I have an internal sidechain source, we really don't get that same movement because the sidechain source is the bass. When you use an internal sidechain source for normal compression, just trying to compress the dynamics of an instrument or voice, the source itself is the sidechain source. So when you make the sidechain source something else, now the level and the envelope of that other source is what's going to control the compression, not the level of the bass itself. So we're getting a very small amount of ducking. There are some compressor settings that we need to change to make this a more drastic and a more noticeable effect. First and foremost, I recommend turning off auto gain, and I also recommend turning off auto release because we want manual control over our attack and release times, and we also don't want any added gain. I'm also going to set the makeup gain to 0 for now, and then the 5 main controls within the compressor itself that are going to control the motion of the effect are going to be the compression threshold and ratio. This is going to determine how much compression takes place, how much ducking takes place. The attack and release time are going to control how quickly or slowly that effect happens. And then the knee has a very important role for getting the best sidechain ducking effect possible that I'll explain in just a moment. Now, there are other sidechain parameters in here for detection and a filter that we're going to go over shortly in other videos. So we're just going to focus on the basics here in this video. So as most of you probably already know, if you pull down your threshold and pull up your ratio, you are going to get more compression. But now the problem is the bass is being so heavily compressed that we can't even hear it. So let's set our threshold to about the middle point here. I'll keep the ratio all the way up, but you can adjust it if you want a softer effect. I also find it helpful to check the graph view. You can get a better visualization of what's really happening to the dynamics. But when I'm playing around with the attack and release, I kind of like to go back to the meter because I can actually see how quickly and slowly the signal is being compressed. So typically for this type of effect, I will use a very short attack and a very short release. That means that the gain reduction is going to happen as quickly as possible, and it's also going to come back to 0 as quickly as possible. And that's one of the things we want here. We don't want the compression to come all the way down and then never come back to 0. We want it to come back to its starting point to get the full sort of dynamic range out of that ducking effect. So you can see the meter is moving really quick because we're using a short attack and release, but it's never quite getting back to 0. So how do you handle this? Well, go to your graph view, and what's really important here to check out is the knee. So you can put this over to the right and you'll get a soft knee, and you can put this over to the left and you get a hard knee. Let's start on the hard knee, and we're going to adjust the threshold until the compression level is sort of dancing around the knee. You don't want it above the knee, you don't want it below the knee, you want it sort of dancing around the knee, because the knee is sort of like the break point between compression and no compression. So see how it's staying above the knee? What's going to happen with that is the meter's never really going to return back to 0. We don't want that because that's just going to give you some unnecessary compression that you don't want. So the trick here is once you dial in all these other settings, go back in and fine tune the knee and the threshold to make sure that your signal is dancing around the knee. It's going below and above the knee. So now you can see that the ducking is returning to 0 each time. Now, if you want less of that ducking effect, less of the compression, you can pull back the ratio. So if you're looking for a really gentle effect, you can pull that back. And you can also play around with your attack and release time. Just be careful with longer release times because the compression is going to duck the signal and then kind of stay there. We want the release to always come back to 0, which is going to require a faster release time. And increasing the attack time will sort of delay the time where the compression comes in. You can try some like shorter values here just to make sure that the ducking happens after the transient of the kick. And by the way, if you mute your sidechain source, the ducking effect will still happen. And that's because sidechain sources are pre-fader. So I can adjust the level on the sidechain source track and it's not going to affect the amount of ducking whatsoever. And I should also mention that when you have a compressor with a sidechain source or any plugin with a sidechain source, you'll see this little arrow on the effects insert. And you'll also see the gain reduction meter showing the gain reduction that's being applied to the channel. Now, one thing you can try if you want is you can play around with some of the different circuits. The problem is that if you use a really short attack time, most of these other circuits are going to give you some very audible distortion. But you can see you can get some heavier compression out of these other circuits than what you can get with Platinum Digital. Although the trade-off, again, is you get to pull up the attack time to sort of alleviate that distortion. And even sometimes that's not going to completely get rid of that distortion. So before we get into the sidechain detection and filter options, I want to show you a few different types of sidechain input options, including instruments, working with drum machine designer kits, and using buses and aux tracks. So we'll cover all that in the next video. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please leave it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel to see more content like this. As always, thank you so much for the support, and thanks for watching.